this, and I would attribute this to the front loading of public engagement that we did prior to submittal to try to iron out any issues that we had. We are putting together the final rulemaking package for the board's consideration and anticipate requesting the board approve the final package at either this month or this month's regular board meeting or March prior to submitting to the OAL for publication. This concludes my opening remarks, and unless there are any questions, I'd like to turn things over to Renato and Rod, who will be discussing the proposed regulations in much finer detail. Thank you.
I see nothing from the public at this time.
Any questions from the board, Mr. President? Or Ryan, did you see anything from the board members?
Nothing from the board members that I can see.
Okay, thank you. Then I'd like to call on Renato Espinosa Torres from HDR to begin the presentation. And Rod Mayer is also available to respond to questions that anyone may have.
Okay, I'll hand over presentation privileges to Renato.
Okay, I just saw a note from Renato that he thinks they're muted. You need to unmute him, Ryan.
One moment, please. It doesn't give me the phone number. It only says the caller.
I think he provided his phone number in the chat. And I see someone has their hand raised. I believe it's Mr. Paul Schultz. You need to unmute yourself, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Renato.
We're actually calling in from a phone 67981. Can you unmute that line?
Okay, so I'm sorry, Renato, but I don't see the phone number in the participant list. All I see is call-in user 10, call-in user 4. It lists them as they call in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down the line and unmute people that are calling in just to make sure that we've gotten the right one. So far I've requested to unmute call-in user 3, requested to unmute call-in user 4, 5, and 7. So just a heads up, a warning, any one of those numbers, you should receive a prompt to unmute yourself. And Mr. Schultz will be with you in a moment. Thank you.
Course in drafting and adopting.
Was it any one of those numbers, Renato? No.
Ryan, is there a star or something that might work?
Yes, star 6 would be the method to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that'll do it.
Oh, sorry about that. All right, well, thanks everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen really quick to put the presentation for everybody to view. So bear with me just 1 second.
Renato, before you get started, there is a question from Mr. Paul Schultz. Mr. Schultz, if you want to ask your question before we get started.
He needs to press star 6.
Okay. Or if he could hold this question until after the presentation.
Yeah, that's what we'd like him to do.
Yeah, let's do that. Perhaps his question is answered during the presentation.
Okay, so should I get started, G?
Please do so. Thank you, Renato.
All right, thank you. Good morning, President Edgar, Vice President Dolan, and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Renato Espinosa Torres. I'm a Senior Water Resources Engineer with HDR. I am the project manager on behalf of HDR and have been since the beginning of the Article 8 update process. I have also helped coordinate interactions between the various participants in the update process, setting up meetings, addressing comments, and assisting in technical updates to the standards. And of course, this has been part of a larger team, which includes Betty Andrews from ESA and board staff. Also with us here today is Mr. Rod Mayer from HDR. He led the technical revision of the standards and was essential to the process. As some of you know, Mr. Rod Mayer led the development of the current standards when he was chief engineer for the Central Valley Flood Protection Board in the early 90s. So if it's okay with everyone, I'll just jump right into it.
Renato, it sounds like there's a bit of an echo. Do you have more than one line open?
Yes, I'm going to close mine.
Yeah, it'll be one. Is that better?
I think we're still getting the echo.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Okay.
Okay,
We're
good.
better.
Okay, thank you.
Let me go back to it. All right. So here's an overview of what we will be presenting today. We'll talk about the objectives of the update, the various revisions, and included. One second.
I can't join you.
Mine's muted. Is it better?
I'm off.
Okay.
Can you go by this?
Okay. Yeah, let me start this again. I apologize for all the technical difficulties. We'll get going here in just a second. All right.
First time.
Okay.
We're living in a virtual world. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's an overview of what we will be presenting today. We'll talk about the objectives of the update, the various revisions, and included breaks, as well as time in the end for questions. These are the objectives of the presentation. We want to provide an overview of the update objectives and the process. We want to highlight major changes and new sections. I don't think we can capture all the changes and updates we made to Article 8. So this is highlighting the major items. We want to present information on public comments. We received a lot of comments through the process. And we want to note sections that were not updated and provide an opportunity for questions. These are the objectives of the Article 8 update. The current Article 8 standards have been in place since 1996 and have not been updated since. In contrast, the Army Corps of Engineers updates their EMs and circulars periodically. This has resulted in some conflicts between the Corps and the current regulations. The objective in updating the board standards was to remove some of the conflicts with Army Corps of Engineer guidelines, to address new technologies and current practices, and cover issues not previously addressed in the standards. We added and updated definitions in Article 2, Section 4, to make these compatible with Army Corps of Engineer guidelines and make the standards more clear. We also updated figures into electronic format, and we developed a statement of reasons. We'll describe these updates more in depth in following slides. First, we want to talk a little bit about the update process. I do want to highlight parts of the process we followed to develop the updated standards. And we'll go in chronological order here from when HDR first became involved. In early 2017, the board provided HDR and ESA the October 2015 draft update to the board standards and a spreadsheet of public comments. The HDR team performed an initial review of the October 2015 draft and of all the public comments received to date. There was approximately 290 public comments on the October 2015 draft. We developed responses to each of the comments and revised the standards consistent with our responses. Most comments were on sections 120, levies, and section 123, pipelines. And most comments resulted in a change to the proposed standards. And additionally, many other changes were proposed by HDR in that first draft. Continuing with the update process, our first interagency meeting was held March 27, 2017 with board staff, DWR, the Corps, HDR, and ESA to initiate review of HDR's draft and responses to public comments. We worked with board staff, DWR, and the Corps during the entire process to address public comments and their own comments. We received more than 400 internal comments and addressed them through this coordination. Board staff, DWR, and especially the Corps performed many timely reviews. These internal reviews resulted in more than 25 lengthy internal meetings/workshops, 10 internal drafts, and 2 public drafts. After the first public draft, we received 57 public comments. This was for the February 2019 draft. We drafted responses to each comment, met with key commenters to discuss proposed responses, and reached an agreement on all the responses in one meeting. We finalized the responses and revised the standards based on the resolutions, and most comments resulted in change to the proposed standards. The board submitted a complete package to the Office of Administrative Law in November 2020. Public notice went out November 27, 2020, and the comment period ended January 11, 2021. No public comments were received during the OAL public review, and no additional changes are proposed since that draft. I think we can open it up. If the board has any questions regarding the process at this time, we'd be happy to answer those.
Do
Okay.
you see any, Leslie or Ryan?
Have anything here, Mr. President?
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I will continue with editorial revisions. So on top of all the technical revisions that we proposed and incorporated into the updated standards, we made a number of editorial revisions. All sections had editorial type revisions to the standards. We increased reliance on defined terms. The defined terms are capitalized for easy identification. For example, defined floodplain was changed to designed water surface elevation, and permitted was changed to allowed, except when discussing issuance of a permit. These types of changes were included to make the regulations and the standards more clear and easy to interpret, less ambiguous. Minor reorganization of standards in a few sections were also included. We'll highlight those as well. I also want to mention sections 112, regulated streams, table 8.1 more precisely. That was unchanged as part of this process. And section 131, vegetation, was unchanged except for defined terms capitalized to make it consistent with the rest of Article 8. Okay, moving on to standard revisions, we'll discuss sections with more significant changes in this presentation. Not all the sections. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think we can capture all the changes that we've incorporated into the standards, but this highlights the major ones. So in Article 2, Section 4, which addresses definitions, we added many defined terms used throughout Article 8. We removed some defined terms no longer used and only defined terms that were not already adequately defined in the dictionary. We don't want to create our own dictionary in these standards. Many new definitions associated with urban areas were also included in the proposed updates. Continuing with Article 2, Section 4, key terms included in the proposed update are adopted plan of flood control, Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, hydraulic impact evaluation procedure, levee right-of-way, maintenance activities, state plan of flood control, urban area, urban criteria area, and urban levee design criteria. On the right here, we can see the portion of the definition for levee right-of-way. This was one definition where there was quite a bit of back and forward between all the reviewers and people that participated in the process. And this is one of the definitions that took a little bit more work, but it is used throughout the standards. Okay, this slide lists sections with major changes to the standards, borrow and excavation, levees, and other sections. In subsequent slides, we will address each of these sections in greater detail, but we wanted to provide a summary of what the sections are that we spent most time working on to revise. I'll get started with Section 116, borrow and excavation activities, land and channel. So we received a comment from the Corps to require 300 to 500 feet setback from a levee for borrow and excavations unless a study is performed. In response, a geotechnical analysis may be required for borrow excavation activity within a levied floodway or on the land side of a levee within 400 feet of the levee right-of-way. The 400 feet was selected to be less ambiguous than 300 to 500 feet. Similar language appears in many other areas of Article 8 involving excavation, such as ditches, ponds, retention basins, and pools. On the right, we have a little bit of the language that we included describing the geotechnical analysis that may be required before initiating any borrow or excavation activity within a levied floodway or on the land side of a levee within these 400 feet. Moving on to Section 120, levees. We received a comment to consider the ULDC, and in response, the urban levee design criteria was referenced and is considered in these standards. We've also included definitions to help interpret the standards with regards to the ULDC. We've also allowed for use of local soils. One of the comments we received was to allow use of local soils for levee repair. In response, we've included a standard that allows for use of local soils for small repairs, typically with less than 10,000 cubic yards of material. And these may use local soils if they are consistent with the adjacent levee fill. As mentioned in an earlier slide, levee right-of-way was better defined, and this requires, the comment was requiring beyond 10 feet is debatable. In one of the drafts of the revisions, there was initially a suggestion that 20 feet should be used for levee right-of-way. There was a back and forward with regards to what an acceptable distance from the levee toe or other adjacent facilities should be. And in general, it is used that 10 feet from the landside levee toe will be included for the levee right-of-way. There are other cases, such as if there already is real estate property that is owned by the inspecting agency, where additional right-of-way would be included in the levee right-of-way. This issue was addressed in the levee right-of-way definition, so that includes all those other instances where this is, and there are exceptions to this 10 feet rule. Continuing with section 120, so there's new language to consider potential hydraulic impact of levee work using the hydraulic impact evaluation procedure. As you may recall from an earlier slide, this is now a defined term, and this would be developed by the Corps. This was developed by the Corps and included in Article 2 definitions. The board may deny a permit based on the hydraulic impact, and this is commonly referred to as the 1% rule. That definition is shown here on the right. This requirement also applies broadly for all encroachments and specifically for activities that may cause a hydraulic impact, such as revetment, buildings, structures, fences, walls, fill, roads, ramps, and bridges. And it generally requires a study if the proposed encroachment covers more than 1% of the floodway. Okay, the board may require installation of piezometers associated with levee construction or reconstruction to monitor pore water pressure. The term secondary levees is defined and allowed to deviate from levee design and construction standards. Delta levees are also addressed. We received a comment that delta levees have unique PL 8499 standards and should not have to meet all of the design and construction requirements of a typical levee. And in general, we agreed with that comment, and so delta levees outside of urban areas may receive waiver from some levee design and construction requirements. Okay, moving on to section 121, erosion control. So one of the comments we received from the Corps was that cobblestone revetment is no longer recommended. We agreed, so cobblestone no longer specifically mentioned or allowed in section 121 standards. Rubble is also no longer specifically mentioned or allowed as suggested by the Corps. And another significant change to section 121 is that there is no longer a recommended quarry stone site for various, velocities or hydraulic conditions. So quarry stone gradations were removed. In general, let me see if we have it. Yep, this slide will address it. In general, we're requiring the revetment to be designed by a civil engineer. The technical standards for design of revetment were updated pursuant to guidance provided in the NCHRP Report 5-68, riprap design criteria, recommended specifications, and quality control. This report is actually very useful, very nice, because it considers and references Army Corps engineering manuals, HEC circulars, and other references. So it compiles a lot of the riprap design criteria into one location. On the right, we have some of the text that was included for riprap design in section 121, or riprap requirements. One of the sections that probably took the most work and required the most updates was section 123, pipelines, conduits, and utility lines. We received 84 public comments on the October 2015 draft. So essentially, that section just required a complete rewrite. We reorganized it, and after many internal review comments and changes, ended up proposing basically a completely different organization and set of rules for that section, set of standards for that section. We've also included extensive new language for horizontal directional drilling. One thing I do want to mention while we're in this slide is that as part of the process, particularly in the beginning of the process when we were reviewing the existing standards, we had a large group of subject matter experts review the standards for their specific field of expertise and provide us comments then. So this is one of the sections where we received a lot of internal comments as well, which were considered for the proposed standards that are being presented here. Continuing with section 123, this slide provides an overview of the organization of section 123, and I think this is important to keep in mind because the section is organized to where the first part provides general criteria for pipelines, conduits, and utility lines. After that, we have a section that provides criteria specific to pipelines within the floodway, then pipelines crossing over, through, or under a levee, gravity drains crossing the levee, pipelines crossing a stream or levee by tunneling, jacking, or horizontal directional drilling, pipe materials allowed on, in, and under a levee, and then the last subsection is pipe materials not allowed within the levee right-of-way. So, again, I thought it was important to include this one so that when these standards are being used, somebody doesn't take a standard for, the section that describes the standards for pipelines within the floodway and try to apply it to another gravity drain crossing or something like that. Okay, continuing with section 123. In the November or October 2015 draft, if I recall correctly, there's a proposed 10-year expiration of pipe permits, and we received a comment that the proposed 10-year expiration of pipe permits is too onerous and burdensome. So in response, we proposed to no longer have a set expiration, but rather require inspection or pressure test with report to the board every 5 years. The board can revoke permit with cause. If the permit may automatically expire if report is 1 year past due after the 5-year inspection requirement. We also received a comment from the Corps that plastic pipe is not allowed in levee unless encased in concrete, or CLSM for electrical lines. So in response, plastic pipes are not allowed in levee. It are only allowed in the levee if encased in concrete. And we also included a minimum encasement thickness depending on the diameter of the pipe. That's something that wasn't specified by the Corps, but is specified in these standards. We also addressed controlled low strength material, CLSM, for pipe backfill, which is not now authorized, with specified CLSM properties and dimensions. In the new standards, there are no minimum pipe diameter for gravity drains and this is because previously the minimum pipe diameter, the purpose of it was to allow for inspection, but with new technologies such as video inspections, this minimum diameter is no longer an issue. So gravity drains are to have permeable backfill for landward 1/3 per the Corps guidance, or CLSM may be allowed. That's what this figure on the right shows, and that's the permeable backfill. Pipes crossing over levees may pass through the freeboard portion of the levee, except for levees designed without freeboard, which were designed using risk analysis. Continuing with section 123, bolted connections are not allowed to address are now allowed, to address potential for differential levee settlement. Recording of pipe installation on the property owner's deed is now required. And horizontal directional drilling under levees, here are some of the key bullets regarding horizontal directional drilling. After a geotechnical investigation with estimated drilling pressure and calculations, horizontal directional drilling will be allowed. It's also required to closely monitor the drilling fluid pressures. An emergency plan approval prior to start is required, and only experienced certified operators are allowed to perform the horizontal directional drilling. Okay, we're moving on to section 126, which addresses fences and gates. So the new standards do not allow for new fences except under 2 cases. In both of these cases, the board can issue a permit and authorize new fences. So the 2 cases under which new fences are allowed is if they are necessary for preventing unauthorized levee access and for protecting structures owned or operated by a public agency. Another standard included in this section is that new fences constructed on the waterway of a levee, waterside of a levee that are partially or wholly underwater during high water events shall be constructed so as to be removable by the permittee in segments during times of high water. Okay, moving on to section 128, bridges and low water crossings. Regarding piles and piers, we received a comment from the Corps. Piles and piers should avoid the levee if possible. Otherwise, they should be pre-drilled and cast in place. And we agreed that this is a good idea. So piles and piers are to be avoided if possible in the levee right-of-way. And if allowed, are to be pre-drilled and cast in place. The board may require a high water safety plan for construction during the flood season or for removal of debris impinging on bridge soffit with inadequate clearance. So the term minor stream, was previously included in the standards and previously required 2 feet of freeboard instead of 3 feet between the design water surface elevation and the soffit. This term, minor streams, was never well defined in the current standards, so it's no longer a term that is used in the proposed standards. Freeboard for a bridge soffit may be reduced to 2 feet on some small unlevied streams. That is the new rule. And low water crossings are also now defined and have standards. And that's what we're showing here on the right. For example, for a low water crossing, that's one of the types of encroachments for which the 1% rule would apply. Okay, moving on to section 129, oil and gas wells. So we received a comment that water wells installed within 300 feet of a levee can damage the levee, especially from piping, require a permit and a safety statement from a civil engineer, was the suggestion. So the minimum setback has been increased in the new standards from 30 feet to 60 feet, and a permit is required within 100 feet, possibly out to 300 feet, with a safety statement from a civil engineer. For water well design, we received a comment that as to specified filter pack materials, well screen, and casing to avoid deterioration and piping. So these are now specified in the proposed standards. Okay. Moving on to section 133, supplemental standards for control of residential encroachments in Reclamation District 1000. So we received a comment from the Corps regarding the hydraulic impact of encroachments. So the Corps will require a hydraulic impact evaluation for new encroachments in Reclamation District 1000 that have potential for causing a hydraulic impact. In response, the hydraulic impact study we're noting that the hydraulic impact study reportedly performed in the 1960s to establish the 150-foot standard for encroachments in RD 1000 was not found. We looked for it and we were not able to find that hydraulic study. So until a new study for RD 1000 is performed, no hydraulic impact study will be required within the 150 feet of from Garden Highway in Reclamation District 1000, except as may be required by the Corps. And a board permit shall be recorded on the deed. I think here we're coming to the end of the sections where we included major revisions. So I want to pause for questions from board members regarding the major revisions to the standards. Do we have any questions?
Any questions from the board?
I have a question.
Joe?
I don't know how this part about pipes through the freeboard, unless it was had a risk-based design, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me. It's either safe to have the pipe go through the levee or not. What's the rationale there?
Rod Mayer is going to answer the question.
Hi, Joe. This is Rod Mayer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So the Corps has a rule in their EM saying that pipelines now must cross over the top of the levee and not go through the freeboard section. But that only applies to levees that they designed without freeboard because they designed them using risk and uncertainty or risk analysis. So it's those few levees designed with risk analysis that don't actually have a designed freeboard that this rule would apply, and the pipe needs to go over the top of the levee. Otherwise, it could go through the freeboard section of the levee. So this was done at the Corps' request. One thing that we don't have at this point, and we asked, but it was a challenge for the Corps, was to identify those levees that were designed using risk analysis. So the way this is likely to play out is that as pipe crossing permits or applications are sent over to the Corps, they would need to check in their records whether that particular levee was designed with risk analysis and doesn't actually have freeboard.
Wow. Isn't there some problems with the pipe going over the top of the levee? That is, it's being unprotected and so forth?
So we do have requirements for protecting it with a minimum 2 feet of cover. So, and then the slope of that approach is no steeper than 1/10. So it results in a hump in the levee. You might need to slow down a little bit if you're driving over it, but not much.
And there's a new figure included in the standards to show that.
That's correct.
Requirement.
There is a new figure for this.
Okay. So it sounds like it's been thought through pretty carefully. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. It was actually discussed quite a bit during the process.
Yeah.
Chair?
Yes, Mary Jane?
Yeah, I kind of want to hit on that point too with the pipelines. You know, at our last board meeting, we had an issue as it relates to the PL 8499. And so with this new criteria, this would eliminate the problems with the utility lines being out of compliance with the, with the Corps standards. Is that correct?
This is Rod Mayer again. I don't quite follow the question. In what way are you thinking it may or may not be in compliance?
So, there was encroachment problems with the utilities, like PG&E or the water sewer lines and stuff like that. So these standards that we're looking at today would alleviate them not being in compliance with the Corps inspections that they do.
So I think you may be getting to an issue of existing versus new.
Yeah, I realize
so
that there's existing, and this is not going to take care of existing, but in the future, working forward, this would alleviate the problem. Is that correct?
Yes, that's our understanding. I don't know exactly what the issue is with those utility lines that you're referring to, but we work closely with the Corps to make sure everything was consistent with their rules, and whenever they flagged something, we addressed it. So the answer should be yes.
Okay, because You know, that was one of the toughest things is when you have a third party, it's very hard to motivate them to make these corrections, yet the reclamation districts are penalized and, you know, actually taken out of this PL 8499 program. And so that was the basis of my question, is that from this point forward, after these rules are accepted, that these type of issues should not be a problem in the future. We only have to address the ones that are existing and haven't been, you know, updated, you know, from the past.
Yes. So I believe the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I also have another question in regards to the levee tow emergency vehicle, well, the 10-foot easement off the toe of the levees. Is 10 feet adequate when you take in consideration emergency vehicles?
Well, generally it should be. There could be an issue, I suppose, if there were overhanging trees along that 10 feet, but in general, 10 feet ought to be adequate. And of course, that's the existing rule for encroachments. There are other rules in play with respect to new levee construction that would encourage a wider easement, including the urban levee design criteria for the urban areas. Mm-hmm. And also the Corps has a standard operating procedure saying that when you're doing major levee reconstruction or new construction, you should acquire 20 feet on the along the landward toe. And this does not conflict with that at all.
Okay, great. Well, and my thought is, you know, if an emergency vehicle such as a fire department, for whatever reason they may be there for, whether it's emergency rescue or whatever, they couldn't turn around in a 10-foot lane. They couldn't turn their vehicle around, and that's the reason I asked the question.
Oh, no, that's for sure, and they would have trouble turning around on a levee, and so so levee crowns typically have a minimum distance between areas available for turnaround as well.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, they would have trouble turning around in a 20-foot. Yeah.
True. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board members at this point?
Anything, Mr. President, here?
Okay, let's proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so this slide addresses the new section that is included in the proposed standards. This is section 139, pools. So pools near the landside levee toe became a major issue when the Corps initiated more rigorous maintenance and inspection requirements linked to PL 8499 assistance. So the major concern for this is the underseepage destabilizing the nearby levee by piping of levee foundation soils. And the current board standards did not specifically address pools. After the October 2015 draft, a new section addressing pools was proposed by board staff. So we did include a new section which addresses pools specifically. A lot of the information that we used to consider in developing the new section that addresses pools came from a study that was done by GEI in 2016, which was a study of pocket area pools. And the study found that nearly all pools near levees pose a piping risk if empty during the high water. Almost no pools near levees pose a piping risk if full during high water. There is some limited experience elsewhere of empty pools inducing piping of foundation soils during high water. So this can easily be addressed by keeping the pools filled during high water season. Okay, and the figure on the right shows what the piping process would be if a pool was not kept full. We also received a comment from the Corps to establish a general rule that pools should be above a 10-to-1 horizontal to vertical line projected downward from the landside levee toe unless otherwise justified with a geotechnical investigation. So, and to establish a general rule that pools within 400 feet of the landside levee toe may require a geotechnical investigation. So, in response, pools must be constructed out of the levee right-of-way. Pools must not be constructed within that 10-to-1 horizontal to vertical projection from the landside levee toe or seepage berm toe without justification from a geotechnical analysis. This top figure on the right kind of illustrates that 10-to-1 projection from the landside levee toe. So in general, you want to make sure that pools within 400 feet of a levee are kept above that 10-to-1 projection, unless it is justified through geotechnical analysis that it's not going to create any problems. Pools within the 10-to-1 projection require a board permit, and boards may require a geotechnical analysis and a permit for pools construction within 400 feet of landside levee toe or the seepage berm toe. Did you want to add anything to this section, Rod? Okay, continuing with section 139, the specific requirements are provided for the geotechnical analysis. Board permit may require pools to be full during the flood season. Board permit may also require access and inspection capability to ensure the pool is full during the flood season. In pools within a levee floodway and less than 300 feet from the waterside levee toe require geotechnical investigation and a permit. Keep in mind that these would be a lot more rare. One place that these may come up is within the Yuba River floodway. And a pool has to be recorded on the property deed. Okay, we've also included or updated a lot of the figures and removed some figures that are no longer applicable based on how the standards were rewritten, and added 2 new figures. So figures were converted to electronic format with improved legibility, so they're now crisp and easy to read. Figures were updated to include terms as they are referenced now within the standards. So for example, the design floodplain is now replaced with design water surface elevation. Other terms such as the shoulder, which is referenced in some of the figures, was more clearly defined as the edge of the levee shoulder or the hinge point of the levee crown. Other similar changes to clarify or make consistent with narrative were also included in the updated figures. So figures that were significantly modified include 8.02, 0.03, and 0.06. 4 figures were removed, which include graph 8.1 and old figures 8.03, 0.05, and 0.06. And 2 figures were added, 8.01 and 8.05. And this is what they're numbered in the new proposed regulations. On the right, we see the 2 new figures. So figure 8.01 shows the minimum distance for dwelling structures or mobile homes from the top of the bank. And in the bottom, this is the figure that we were talking about, figure 8.05, we were talking about earlier for pipes going over a levee and the required minimum covering. This slide is just to show the difference between the figures that are included in the current standards versus the new figures. It just should be noted that the current figures are hard to read. Some of the figures were, some of the elements in the figures were pretty darn near impossible to read. So we've just cleaned that up and they're now available in electronic format. Okay, so those are the new items that are included in the standards. I'm going to move on to talk about the statement of reasons. So this is another document that we helped develop along with the revised standards. So the Office of Administrative Law requires every regulation to have a reason. And they require that this be provided in a separate document called the Statement of Reasons. Just for comparison purposes, the regulations for the proposed standards are 89 pages long. The Statement of Reasons is 160 pages long, almost twice as long. And that's just to provide a the reasoning behind each standard. The Statement of Reasons was developed after the regulations were essentially in final form to avoid having to go back and change 2 documents anytime we went and made updates to the standards. And HDR coordinated closely with board staff in preparing the Statement of Reasons. When we started this process, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to go back and revisit the standards. We weren't able to find a copy of the final Statement of Reasons from the 1996 standards. So we were able to get a draft Statement of Reasons from 1995. And although this was incomplete, it covered probably about 80% of the current regs. It was still very helpful. And the new Statement of Reasons will be helpful to board staff to understand the reasons for each rule and whether an exemption or variance can be justified for a particular encroachment. And that concludes the bulk of our presentation. So if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to take them right now.
Okay, thank you, Bernardo. I'll take it from here. Are there any questions from the board members?
I have one.
Okay, Brian.
That was Joe, Mr. President.
Oh. The drawings that showed the design flood level, just for clarification, so if a levee is designed using risk analysis, there'll be no design flood elevation. Is that correct?
Joe, this is Rod. And Joe, I think you know this better than I do, but I think it would be the top of the levee.
Yeah, that's what. Because they don't use a design flood as such for risk analysis, I don't believe.
Right.
Okay. Is that clarified in the regulations also?
That part isn't, but it is allowed in the regulations to use risk analysis to design a levee.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question through the
Yeah,
chair.
Mary Jane.
So I'm really glad to see this pool section be added to the this rulemaking. I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been there before, but you had mentioned that it has to be 400 feet off from the levee and it has a 10-to-1 projection. Is that correct?
No, it could be within the 400 feet from the levee, but if it's within those 400 feet, the rule requires that it stays above the 10-to-1 projection unless it is shown through a geotechnical study that it will not cause any issues.
Okay. And then one of the other thing is that you have to maintain it full during high water times. And how do you enforce that? I mean, you can have them sign a document, and then unless you look physically in their backyard during high water times, I mean, how do you make that happen?
This is Rod. We think this is probably, you've hit on one of the more challenging aspects of implementing the regulations. We think it's important to keep them full. We have the condition available to the board to put on the permit to keep it full, and the condition also that the board would have access for, so that they could inspect and see it. In many cases, you may be able to see the pool, whether it's empty or full, just from the levee crown nearby if the pool is relatively close. In other cases, it may actually be a new task for inspectors to, during the flood season and during high water events, actually go check with property owners that have a permitted pool to make that inspection. So it is a little bit burdensome. I think you'd hear your own board staff concur in that. But we also do think it's the right thing to do, to at least give the board the authority to do that and have it in the permit.
I agree wholeheartedly. I know that over the city of Yuba City, some of those old historic homes that are bumped up against the levee had pools, and that was a point of contention as they were being, you know, the levees were being invested in. And so I'm just, you know, wanted to bring this up, put it on the record that, you know, the enforcement part of this is very important. And so adding it to maybe the inspections would be appropriate. And then my follow-up question related to this is that you had mentioned prior about borrowing soil for the project within a 400 feet. Do you have the same type of criteria for that 10-to-1 projection when you borrow dirt for the levee?
No, the 10-to-1 rule doesn't necessarily apply for that, but a geotechnical study is required.
Okay.
And also, I'm just going to throw out a thought I've had that drones may be an actual way to get up and inspect pretty quickly an area to see if pools near the levee are full.
That would be really good to have that technology out there to do that. Absolutely. So when you look at borrowing like 400 feet off a levee, is that dirt put back, is like other dirt put back in there, or is it going to be just a hole there? So
what we're talking about is it's left as a hole. So there can be temporary borrow, especially outside of flood season, and that's not so much of an issue unless they're damaging the blanket layer. Yeah. So there might be a study for that, but there's going to be a lot less concern if the hole is backfilled.
Because I've seen boils that have been like a half a mile off the levee, you know, and so that's always my concern, is that when you start digging so close to the levee, those things are kind of possible. But like you said, there's some kind of analysis that you have to do, engineering study, then I'm sure that they take that all into account.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes, this is Jane Dolan.
Yes. Yes.
I have two. The first one is really, well, I have three. The first is really just an observation. This process began quite a number of years ago, and the two board members who were somewhat monitoring that are no longer on the board. And I kind of volunteered myself to push this along so it wouldn't take another 5 or 10 years to update regulations that predate the creation of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, the adoption of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and any modern construction standards and analysis for the 21st century that are being implemented. And also the regulations that existed were only in paper format, and when they were digitized, as it was pointed out, sometimes they become unreadable, particularly by diagrams and maps. So this is clearly needed. So that's my first thing. I posted all this, so it's been a tremendous effort. I understand why it took a few years and not a few months, but I'm one who gets a little patient to move into the 21st century. The second is, you'll ask for it at some point, so I'm going to say it now, to establish a policy of the board, whoever is on it, that there is a specific regular review for potential update of these so that we are not waiting 20 years. And pressure really from our construction and safety stakeholders that we need to look at it. So lastly, there are questions in the chat.
Jane, let me interrupt you at that point because I agree with you, and you recall that I set out as a goal at the beginning of this hearing that we really ought to get to a point where we're reviewing this every 5 years in accordance with the update of the plan. Would you agree with that?
I do.
All right.
To do it concurrent with the plan update might be something that would be conflicting and overburdening, but at the adoption of the plan, it would immediately start a review of these standards to see if they meet what was adopted.
Yeah.
But not to wait until we think there's a problem or our stakeholders push it or someone says, oh my gosh, we have this language in our standards that no one's used for the last decade. Maybe we ought to update it. But we can do that in an established fashion.
I agree.
So your idea is great. I'm reinforcing it, Mr. President.
Okay.
There are questions in chat, and some are being answered, some are not. So I don't know how they get part of the if they're in chat.
Yeah, I'll take care of the public in just a minute. Okay. One of the things, Jeet, if I may, you mentioned the question on fences, that there were 2 exceptions to fences. Could I have those again, please?
Yes.
Oh, you gonna go for it, Renato? Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, G, if you want to take it.
So again, it is to prevent unauthorized access, and then also for protection of levees or flood control facilities maintained by or owned by a public agency.
Okay, now with regard to control of public access, you're talking about those folks that have private property that they want to prevent trespassing, essentially?
Yes, we would read that. We would read that way. We read the proposed regulations to prevent unauthorized access, which would also include private property.
So that
I'm sorry.
So if in the event that it would desire to, as our maintenance folks have indicated, to have no cross levees, we are going to be reviewing these on a case-by-case basis, and based upon the hearings, we'll make a determination. But we need to get some rules clarified in order to comply with any kind of a requirement. We'd have to actually negotiate a flowage easement or something that would prevent the fence or something with the property owner. How would that work?
Well, it doesn't prohibit someone from applying for a permit to have a fence crossing the levee if it's their private property. It would still be within the board's discretion whether to allow or approve that permit or not, but it would not be prohibited.
Okay, it would not be permitted. It would not be deemed to be permitted then. In other words, it's not permitted and not disapproved, right?
So let me take a step back, because I'm not sure if I understood what you said, and that's my fault. But maybe if I rephrase, a property owner that had private property that included the levee would not be prohibited from making an application to the board to construct a fence across the levee. Of course, it would be to the board's discretion whether to approve that permit application or not. But okay, there would not be a bar on receiving applications by a property owner for a cross levy fence.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. There's no deemed approval or disapproval on it. It's subject to case by case basis and a hearing on each application.
Yes, just like any other permit.
Just like
Encroachment
any other. Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that clarified.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Oh, Brian?
Yeah, actually, to follow up on that, Mr. President and Jeet, and so as looking at the statement, there were questions about whether the and is an and or an or, and the basis for it, and you're saying that someone who wants a fence to prevent access that isn't authorized could apply one for a permit, and we review it on that basis. And we're not talking about a variance or something, but it's a regular permit process.
Yeah.
Or also, if the landowners aren't concerned about unauthorized access, but we or a local maintaining agency is concerned about the second half of the sentence, protecting the structures, that could also be permitted, but we require a permit, but it's not a variance. It's in the reg. It's something that can be done.
Yes, that's correct. And,
Thank you for that clarification. I think that might help some people. Okay, any other questions from the board?
Before we move on, President Edgar, I would just like to add, and I don't know if Rod would like to chime in on this point as well, but going back to the 2015 draft of the regs, there actually was a prohibition for any cross levy fences in that draft. And so that is something that was discussed, and we felt that was too onerous. And so we felt that this was a good middle ground to allow cross levy fences in limited circumstances.
This is Rod. I agree with that.
But it would still be at the discretion of the board.
Yes, this would still come to the board just like any other permit application.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else from the board?
Yeah, Mr. President, not to belabor this, but I have a feeling it's relevant to a number of the people who are here watching. So, Jeet, I noticed also in the rule, same section but different paragraphs. There's a separate paragraph about gates that's a couple of paragraphs down from the paragraph about fences, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on the intent there and what that means, just as a way to illustrate for us and people who might be observing how this is intended to go.
Do you have the exact subsection, Board Member Johnson? And I might let Rod Mayer take this question because I think we actually even talked about this yesterday.
Right. It looks like I'm looking at it, and we can come back to this too if it's worth looking at and responding. I don't know how much it's going to help with the audience, but it caught my eye. I think it's section 126. The page that I'm looking on in the red line is 75 in my printout anyway.
Mm.
And subparagraph A starts, new fences shall not be constructed on the levy section, as the sentence we've been discussing. And then C says gates crossing the levy crown or within a floodway are allowed by the board, and then sets forward standards for how those would be constructed.
Yes, this is Rod. So the fences that cross need to have a gate. And I guess one of the more important provisions about those gates is how wide they need to be. And that really hasn't changed since the 1996 version of the standards. Is there another concern that you might have with respect to gates?
No, I think that actually explains it. What you're saying is if we go through the process and there's a fence, there has to be a gate. And subparagraph C is lays out what the gate has to include. And my question was whether it's something separate, and you're saying it's not. It's part of the management for how these work. So I think
yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else from the board? Okay, I'm going to start on the public testimony at this point.
President Edgar, I just wanted to ask, we do have permitting section chief Gary Lemon, who was going to give his thoughts on how these regulations were going to impact permitting staff's workflow and such. I don't know if you want to wait to hear that from Gary, or if you'd like to hear that first before opening up to public comment. Just an option for you to consider.
How long is that presentation, Jeet?
He doesn't have any prepared slides. I don't think it would take more than a few minutes.
Okay, well, let's hear Gary then.
Very well.
Hey, President Edgar, everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, President Edgar, Vice President Dolan, members of the board. For the record, my name is Gary Lemon, Chief of the Permitting Section. I'll make my comments short. I want to start off by thanking Renato, Rod, and Betty. This was a monumental task, as you're all seeing. But I think the results are a vast improvement from the 96 version. I particularly like the expanded definition section of this new rewrite. The old 96 version had 39 definitions to 83 for the new rewrite. I think that's key for staff when they're reviewing because, for example, access ramps is used throughout Title 23, and there's little nuanced differences from one section to another. So this just makes everything consistent. And of course, obviously, the clarifications to standards throughout Article 8 assist permitting staff in conducting timely reviews, and I think may actually reduce the need for waivers and variances by the board. As Renato pointed out, the update also aligns our standards with those of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers 408 permission section, which is a huge accomplishment. This will also help in shorten review times. And I won't go through what those things are, but there's several that we're now aligned with the Corps, and that'll obviously help move things along. When I started with the board, I was told by then permitting guru, I call him Mr. Steve Dawson, that Title 23 was written in many shades of gray to allow for engineering decisions. As you know, all the permitting staff are engineers. Title 23 can't cover every situation that we deal with when reviewing projects. It's due in part because the board's, as you know, the board's jurisdiction, area of jurisdiction is the entire Central Valley. So we're always throwing some curveballs that aren't your black and white scenarios as far as reviews. So this update, I think, lessens a lot of the gray, but it doesn't remove them all, which, like I said before, there's too many nuances, too many different projects. The rewrite, contains adjectives like small for streams, significant, significant excavation, injurious to the flood control project, words like that. And that's all because, like I say, of the unique situations. The thing that I think is as important as the rewrite to Title 23 is the accompanying statement of reasons. And again, this ties in with my comments before. Whenever there's some curveball, nuance, however you want to say it, we can go to the statement of reasons, and it clarifies the intent at the time. Maybe not so much now, but in 3, 4, 5 years down the road before the next update, it really, really comes in handy. We still look at the draft version today, and that helps, but it's not to the level that this statement of reasons will be. But I do agree with President Edgar and other members of the board that we do need to update title continual basis. Obviously because there's new technology, updated hydraulics, and the inclusion of new standards like we have now for 200-year level protection in urban areas. But I'll keep it at that. And if there's any questions that I can answer, being the permitting section chief, I can sure do that. But that's all I had to say.
Thanks very much, Gary. Appreciate that. Those are helpful comments. Any questions from the board of Gary Lemon at this point? Okay, let's move to some public testimony, and I have a list of 10 speakers at this point, so I'll just start off. Stephen Lightstone is the first speaker. Steve, if you could press *6 to unmute yourself. Steve, are you there? Steve Lightstone.
This is Steve Lightstone. Sorry, so in trouble.
Okay, Steve, please proceed.
Yeah, I'm Stone. I'm one of the coordinators of the West Pocket Neighborhood Watch. Homes on the west side of the pocket. If you put us, we're 70 homes south of the last fence, private property parcel, and our concerns with the language.
Is that, Steve, is that in the big pocket or the little pocket?
The big pocket. So we're a mile north of Garcia Bend Park.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're on one of those nebulous areas of the levee where it is public property, but it's not really patrolled or maintained in terms of security by anyone. And so our neighborhood watch was formed because we had a lot of homeless and just a lot of vagrant and crime. So we put ourselves, we established ourselves when we patrol the levee regularly, just on our walks with our dogs and stuff like that. But our biggest concern right now is the removal of the cross levee fences on the private property parcels to our north. And since the last, I don't know how many meetings ago, when it was asked whether we could, or whether the private property owners could reapply for permit for their cross levee fences, and it was basically said you could apply, but they probably won't get approved. That statement was seized upon by some local media and some local community organizations, and now it's kind of perceived public knowledge that the fences are coming down. And in addition to the bike trail language that is in Title 23 in the revisions, it's perceived to be common knowledge that the bike trail is open and the levee fences are coming down. So we have seen a lot of trespassers on the private property parcels and a massive increase in activity and with the homelessness, the vagrancy, and the crime on our section, the public portion of the levee. So I've asked people on the levee as I see them trespassing on the other sides of the fences, and I ask them, and they're like, "Oh no, haven't you read? The fences are coming down; they're not going back up, and this will be or is public property now." And so our concerns are strictly for the safety and security of our neighborhood, but the cross levee fences and maintaining the security of the private property directly affects us and our neighborhood and the Camilla Waldorf School to our south, which is part of our neighborhood watch.
Okay, I guess you heard the testimony, notwithstanding what you've read in the paper, is that, you know, it's our opinion that anybody who has a request for a fence can apply to the board. You'll be held a hearing will be held, and the board will make a determination. But we're taking each one of these on a case-by-case basis. That's what our legal counsel's advised, and that's what the regulations at this point are. I just, you know, questioned them, and that's what they are being interpreted as. I hope that's correct, isn't it, Jeet?
It is, and if I could also just add as a reminder that the board's easement on this levee is not for public access. It's for flood control. So just by virtue of this project or these fences coming down, and even if they are not to go up, and no one's saying that they won't, that does not confer a public right of access on this levee. It does not affect people's property rights. to the extent the city plans a bike trail, they're going to have to undergo their own effort to either through eminent domain or negotiation to obtain the rights to do so. And the city itself would have to come to the board for a permit for a bike trail if they ever intend to actually build one there. So I just wanted to remind everyone that the board's easement is not a public access easement. It is not a recreational easement. It is for flood control.
And reading the the sections that allow the city to build the bike trail or another public entity, as it was stated, some of our neighbors were reading that, and in there it does not say that the city needs to apply for a permit. It just says a public entity will be allowed to build a bike trail. Later on in the language, it says the permittee, kind of assuming that the city needs to apply for a permit. And then it also did not state that who is going to pay. It did not say that the Central Valley Flood Board responsible and or the pay. We just think that language is a little bit premature, considering the city has no plan, no money for any security or safety or patrolling, and a 12-foot wide park that is 6 or so miles long through the Big Pocket and the Little Pocket would constitute the largest park in Sacramento and the largest new park in Sacramento, and it's kind of a lawlessness, nebulous area that has no plan for patrolling, security, safety, lights, access, parking control. So those are our concerns with writing in the bike trail into the flood plan and then absolving the Central Valley Flood Board, the hold harmless language in there that basically says you're allowed to build a bike trail, but we're not responsible for anything that happens if the bike trail is built. Those are our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Renee O'Neill, please. Renee, can we have you unmute yourself or whatever you need to do?
A reminder, if you're calling in, to press *6 to unmute yourself on the telephone.
Mr. President, I might suggest also that you read out a couple of names so that folks know if they're next and they can be prepared and ready.
Good idea, Leslie. I'll do that. After Renee O'Neill, we have Paul Schultz and Gail Nadell. So Renee, are you there?
I believe he's under Ronald Fullwider. Is that correct? I see her motion. Okay. I'm going to unmute her right now, or ask.
Okay. All right.
Apologies.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for letting me speak. Because I'm not a public speaker, I have written statements. Some of my questions have been addressed, but probably my biggest frustration is that the board knows me. I'm a property owner. I have a legally permitted cross-levee fence. And I've been in numerous communications with the board where, yes, you've continuously told me we can apply for a permit. My frustration is you've had this ongoing rulemaking package that takes into consideration those fences and gates. And at no point, at 0 point, has anyone told us of that. I've been in communication with the Sacramento River East Levee Project Liaison at the board. And I've asked her, if the board is taking actions regarding these fences and permits, will they please notify me? And I get nothing. And so that's my real frustration. And the board knows we have a very large group, probably 200 plus homeowners opposing the removal of those fences and gates. And there was no notification, in my opinion. There was nothing on the website about the rulemaking. There was nothing about this public period of comment, and we're not knowledgeable to that, or I'm not. Maybe everybody else is, but I think you see a lot of frustrated people out there because they were unaware. And we've been very involved. I've been in communication with the board since July, participating in your workshop, attending meetings, and at no point was I told changes to these regs involve the cross levy fences. So that is my frustration.
Well, we just had our legal counsel go through a recitation of all the public noticing, Lorraine. I'm sorry if you were paying attention, but Jeet, you might just go over that again, please.
Certainly, President Egger, thank you. Our noticing requirements are compliant with the Administrative Procedures Act. We did have a workshop in November of 2020 on this, on the topic of the rulemaking, and well, actually it was a board meeting. My apologies, the board meeting of the November board meeting, and again at the workshop in December on the status of this rulemaking. There was a workshop a couple of years ago as well as we were developing these regs, and I'm not suggesting that you should have been aware of that, but this rulemaking is not tied to the Sacramento River East Levee project in particular. These are overarching, as you've heard, overarching updates that are long overdue, and it is our position that the changes to the fencing, the regulation dealing with fences, does not affect the ability of a private property owner to apply for a permit to construct a fence across a levee.
But just so you know, the link to the reg changes was buried on your website. It wasn't prominent on the website. Not all of us, especially at my age, are as technically skilled as some of the younger people. And the younger people have.
Hey, Renee, wait a minute. Renee, it was on the agenda. It was at the board meeting.
The rulemaking, perhaps, but I don't think it referenced cross levee fences, which is a huge issue to us. I'm just saying.
It's right. Oh, come on.
I would just add that there is a tab on our homepage titled Title 23 Rulemaking.
Don't interrupt her.
I'm done.
There's a tab on our homepage.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Paul Schultz, please.
Yes, may I temporarily defer to yield time to Mr. Portendo before I speak? He may well cover the issues that I want to address.
Okay, I don't have him on my list, Paul. What's the name again?
All right, then I will proceed, okay? Let's see. At the beginning of this session, somebody from the board, did they not indicate?
Paul, you have an echo going. Do you have you need to turn either your phone off or your computer off, one or the other.
Well, I have not been unmuted on my computer.
Well, there you go. Seems to me that okay.
Consequently, I had to call in. I had not been unmuted on the computer.
You're still getting an echo. I don't know why.
Can you hear me when I say I have not been unmuted on the computer?
Yeah, with an echo. I hear it with an echo. Try it again.
Hi, Mr. Schultz. I've requested that you unmute yourself through your computer. Maybe that'll have better luck.
Now we can't hear it at all.
All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm going to turn off my phone. All right, at the inception of this meeting, somebody from the board stated that prior to the deadline for public commentary on January 11th, there were absolutely zero, nada, no public comments. Did I hear that correctly? And who did I hear that from?
I think Jeet indicated that.
Yes, this is
Okay.
Chief with the Board's Council. We have a dedicated email set up to accept comments to the rulemaking, and we did not receive any comments through that email. I did get a message from a consulting group, MBK, that they did submit a letter on the 11th. We did not receive that, but they have forwarded that to me, so it is now in my possession, and I will be sharing it with the consulting team, and we will be reviewing and responding to that.
You attributed to the lack of comments to the fact that public commentary had been held at a previous meeting, did you not?
Yeah, so what we did is
the answer is yes. Okay, the answer is yes. You did attribute it to the fact.
Would you let me respond, sir?
You answered my question.
This is not a deposition. I'd like to clarify my answer so you can fully understand, unless you're not interested in that.
I certainly don't want to deprive you of your, I presume, right to articulate the reasons for your response. I will say I have some follow-up questions based on the fact that you received zero public comment, to the point that there was no meaningful notification to those interested parties that the board knows are interested parties. That's where I'm going with this, which is one thing that Ms. Renee Fullwater also commented on. You will find that none of the property owners on this meeting site were ever made aware of the fact that there was a finite period for public commentary. Now, I invite your response to that, certainly.
Comment periods are not open-ended. There is a statutory requirement for a 45-day comment period. The board has complied with that.
And how did the board comply with that?
By posting the rulemaking on its webpage, by publication through the OAL, the Office of Administrative Law published it in their notices, which go out every other week, and notification during the board meeting and at the workshop that there was an open public comment period to respond or comment on the proposed regulations.
Okay, so one, there was a link on the website. Two, there was notification at a previous, presumably the November meeting. Would I be accurate about that?
You're accurate about that, yes.
Okay, and one other method that I failed to capture.
The December 2020 workshop, also this item was discussed. The rulemaking was discussed at our workshop.
But was a public notification finite period notified at that meeting?
Yes, that was discussed in both the November board meeting and at the December workshop, and it was on our agendas, which are posted 10 days in advance of all of our meetings, of all of our public meetings, rather.
All right. It is my contention that you're incorrect, that you received zero public commentary because of prior expressions of prior, but rather you received zero commentary because it was not publicized effectively to the affected parties. I will move on. The issue here for most of us is the cross levee fences that you intend to removed, correct?
Well, I'm not gonna, that's your assertion to make. Are you asking me to agree with your assertion? The topic of today's presentation is not just the cross levy fences.
No, but it is the matter of concern for most of the public participants at this meeting.
Well,
And so I would like to ask some questions about the, pardon me?
I do not know of all the participants in the meeting. I know we have consultants, we have stakeholders that are interested in other portions of the regulations that are being promulgated.
Well, the people here that are interested in the removal and replacement of the cross levy fences, please raise their hands.
Paul, we're going to have to move on here.
Okay, I want to address the cross levy fences. Okay, this is the opportunity we have previously not had opportunity to publicly comment. My understanding is that the cross levy fences are going to be removed for levy maintenance. Am I right about that? I know I'm right about that.
They're going to. That's what I wanted to clarify with you. They're going to be taken down for the construction of the project that's now going to be done by SAFEA, which is to increase the stability of those levees, which are now in substandard condition. And that construction period will go on probably for 4 to 6 months, I would assume. They are going to be taken down. The question is, are the cross levy fences going to be automatically put back up? And it's the board's position that they will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis based upon an application of each property.
Okay, you appreciate the fact that that is a hollow bait and switch answer to the issue of whether or not the cross levy fences will be replaced and protect the private property of the Riverside owners. You do understand that you have no intention of granting any permits for a cross levy fence.
That's a wrong intention. That's your characterization of what we're going to do. That's not.
Why will you not issue permits for the rebuilding of cross levy fences prior to their removal?
Because we've already discussed that and made a determination.
That's not an answer. That is a deflection. You will not issue cross levy fence rebuilding permits prior to the removal of the cross levy fences because you have no intention of granting any permits for the reconstruction of the cross levy fences.
Of course, that's your opinion. Let's move on. Gail
That's
Nader,
a fact.
please. Gail Nader, please. Gail, are you prepared to make a comment?
Yes, thank you for this time. Can you hear me?
Sure.
President Edgar and members of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, I appreciate President Edgar, you asking for the clarification so that going into this public comment time, you're as prepared as possible for the questions that our neighborhood has been meeting to talk about and the concerns that we are facing. My name is Gail Kodani Nadal, and I am one of the homeowners that does have a cross levy fence on my property. My family has lived in our home for 51 years. The river and its natural environment have been enjoyed by my family and many homeowners with this fence. The fence has also protected us from the increased homeless population seen on the river's levee and the potential risks that come with it, such as burglary and property destruction. The fence has allowed us to maintain clean and well-kept backyards and riverfronts as well. So again, thank you for that clarification. It helps me to understand a little bit better because I presumed that a permit is needed to have the cross levee fence rebuilt, but I was also the impression that this would not take place. I also have attended many of the meetings held and feel that I was never told of this proposed rule change with regards to the cross levee fence and the permits that were discussed. I have asked that the removal of the fence be considered temporary and that the permit not be considered revoked while the levee improvement project occurs. I am aware of SAFCA entering temporary construction easements which appear to accomplish their goal, and ask that the same temporary situation be afforded homeowners with cross levee fences. For myself, this meeting that was scheduled, I do not feel I was given any notice of the proposed rule change. From my perspective is what I'm sharing with you at this point in time. And that this change will have a severe impact to my privacy and my ability to fend off any unwanted trespassers. I believe a public opportunity is needed so that all homeowners affected by this have been rightfully informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. You're aware that the original regulations that were issued actually had a prohibition to cross levee fences. The regulations now state that they will be subject to a case-by-case review by the board depending upon the application.
Thank you for that information.
You bet. Thank you for coming. Cindy
President
Stinson,
Egger, if I could
please.
just clarify, I don't want to, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, but just to get it out in the open, what I stated earlier about the prohibition of cross levee fences related to a 2015 draft of proposed regulations that was never made public. Well, it was made public and
wasn't made
received comments, but we did not go forward with that. When we took the current effort, we reviewed that draft proposed regs and a reg and made the changes to allow for cross levee fences.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But the first draft did have a prohibition. It does not now.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Cindy Stinson, please.
Hi, that's me. I'm Cindy.
Oh, hi, Cynthia. Cynthia. Okay.
No, it's Cindy. My mom named me Cynthia, but it's Cindy.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, board members and President Edgar, thank you for letting me speak. I'm the acting school director of Camellia Waldorf School located on Pocket Road. We have 3 acres that back right up to the levee. We have approximately 125 children ages 3 to 13 and a staff of 30. We are deeply concerned about the planned actions to remove the cross levee fences on the eastern levee portion of the river in the Pocket neighborhood with no clear fence replacement plan. We believe this is extremely unsafe for our children in our school. We view ourselves as vital stakeholder in this neighborhood, and we feel like we've been completely left out of the conversation concerning the fences and the impact of their removal, with no solicitation of our input into how this will affect our children. I understand that it sounds like we were supposed to know to go to a website to know that there was a public comment section. We have literally been on campus just about every day for the last 8 months. I've seen no mailings. There's been no canvassing, any type of thing that would give us a heads up that this is occurring. We only recently heard of the plan to remove the cross levee fences and of the proposed rule changes. So we'd like to request that the board hold a hearing to discuss the proposed rule changes on cross levee fences, as we would like to have our voice heard and how it would affect us, as well as the other levee residents in our entire community. We would also like to hear testimony from experts on how the removal of the cross levee fences will impact the environment and our school. We would specifically like to hear testimony on the impact of the health and safety of removing these fences and not replacing them. And I just want to say, prior to my time at Camellia, I spent 20 years as a police officer for the city of Sacramento. I retired as a lieutenant in 2019. I am very aware of the strains that are put on police departments right now. It would be near impossible for uniformed officers to assist levy residents or us when we call about trespassers. Our children walk on the levee daily. We often hold outdoor classes on the levee. The proposed action by the board will have dire effects for our school's operation, not only for our privacy, but for the safety of all of our children. Again, it sounds like the public comment section for this issue may have been closed, but because of the lack of notice to interested stakeholders, I would respectfully like to ask the board to hold a hearing to look at the various impacts that this rule change will have. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Cindy. Brian Manning, please.
Good afternoon, President Edgar and board. This is Brian Manning. I represent some folks that are dealing with these issues, and I just wanted to make a couple comments. First, I'd like to thank board staff for talking with me yesterday about some of the issues affecting owners of cross levee fences, and I think we had a good discussion, so I just wanted to let everybody on the board know that, so I appreciate that. One of the things that we discussed was that I think the language in the modification to section 126 is not, it can be interpreted differently than what we heard today. And I appreciate what we heard today, that it's two situations where it can be to stop unauthorized access or protect public property. So I appreciate that, but I think with the word "and" in the language, that creates some complexity in how it could be interpreted in the future when all of us are gone. Also, I think that there should be a definition or maybe some additional language regarding what unauthorized access means. Maybe as we heard today, which again, appreciate that it does include limiting trespassing across private property. And so I just think that if we have that express clarification, that at least from my perspective, will ease a lot of the heartburn. And finally, I appreciate that the modification to section 126, the taking down of the cross levee fences for the project does not impact or otherwise prohibit a property owner from then making application to have a fence and gate put back up. I just would like some clarification if any of these discussions that have been ongoing regarding section 126 or the bike trail or anything else will have an effect on the considerations that the board will use in exercising its discretion. So I appreciate that it doesn't stop somebody from applying. I just want to know, or is it going to change what the board considers when it's making its determination? And with that, I don't have anything else.
Thank you very much, Brian. Tom Engler, please.
Hi, President Edgar, Tom Engler, MBK Engineers. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm here today on behalf of the Central Valley Flood Control Association. I appreciate Jeet noting that we had submitted comments and somehow they did not make it through the system, so you had not received them. So I'm just curious as to what the next steps are on that, Jeet. Is that something that we're going to set up some side meetings to address these comments, or would it be better if we hit on the high points here and scheduled some follow-up meetings?
Hi, Tom. This is Jeet. Yeah, I am going to share that with our consultant team and board staff. We'll review your letter and we'll be reaching out to to discuss your comments. And we'll be in touch.
Great. So then, President Edgar, the one main comment I'd like to touch on today is the first comment in the letter about it deals with the fact that these new regulations often don't specify that local maintaining agencies have delegated authorities through the board through their assurance agreements and are responsible for certain requirements in the operations maintenance manuals. And these seem to regulate LMAs most of the time the same way as they regulate everyday property owners. And we think that there should be some consideration given to LMAs having a little bit more flexibility and leeway to be able to get their jobs done. Right now, it's difficult sometimes that there's not clear direction as to whether or not LMA actions require a permit. And so we just want to make sure that something in here acknowledges that local maintainers have delegated authority through the board, have assurance agreements through the board, and as long as they're meeting the requirements of, local maintaining agencies, for those in the check that are wondering is what LMA stands for, that those local maintainers are able to perform their jobs without having to go to the state and possibly the Corps every time they want to do something besides mow the levee. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll follow up with the rest of our comments later.
Thanks, Tom.
Go ahead, Chief.
Thanks, Tom. As you may be aware, that we are putting a list together of future updates, and we'll be sharing that once we have an internal list, and we'll be reaching out to our local partners in getting their ideas and feedback on our list to see if there's anything else that needs to be added, or also determining the priority of what needs to be addressed next.
Okay, I have one that is entitled MBK. Tom, is that somebody else other than yourself?
That's Mike Moncrief. He's our representative from the Delta side of things.
Okay, Mike, please.
Thank you, President Edgar, members of the board. Again, Michael Moncrief with MBK Engineers. Again, on behalf of the Flood Control Association. One of the other general comments with respect to the submittal from January 11th that was put out is the importance of the spirit of the regulations. And I appreciate what Gary stated and the comments from Mr. Mayor as well. I think a lot of this is going to be based on how these regulations and these updates, which I think the association generally supports wholeheartedly this update process, but there are some that we want to ensure that the spirit is to still provide that flexibility, because the system is very unique in many circumstances throughout both the Sacramento and San Joaquin flood control systems. And so I think one of the important things is just ongoing communication and dialogue. One of the interesting definitions that Mr. Lemon alluded to, a large number of new definitions, was the definition that includes the non-project levy components as part of the floodway or as part of the state plan of flood control. And I think there are many components of the regulation that if you were to overlay those on these non-project levy systems are going to create a large amount of dialogue and issues related to meeting certain standards, which they more than likely do not. And that goes back to something Mr. Countryman stated about what level of design is going to be utilized when interpreting permits or approvals, which currently these non-project levies do not go to the flood board for approval prior to maintenance or repairs that are performed on the system. So I just want to stress the value of the coordination and outreach with the association and these LMAs that are maintaining the system. Thank you.
Mike, this is Bill Edgar. How do you deal with like the city of Stockton, which is obviously a large city that will have to meet the 200-year flood protection standard? A lot of their system adjacent to the Delta is made up of private levees and project levees that are together. Now, if you're looking at trying to protect the city of Stockton from a 200-year, how do you not look at those private levees?
I would, I believe Mr. Elias is on the phone or on this call. I do not represent the city of Stockton, but I could generally give you my thoughts, but I'd rather have a representative in that region answer that question for the board. A large amount of my clients are rural project levy state plan of flood control LMAs. And while I do feel many of these regulation updates do serve the risk reduction intent for ULDC for urban areas, the importance for the rural areas is flexibility and interpretation of these regulations. I do not disagree with you, Bill, that working on these project, non-project systems around urban areas is a paramount issue to overcome. The ULDC criteria are helpful in getting to that point. I think these regulations are in line with a lot of those criteria.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McClendon, William McClendon. Mr.
Hello?
McClendon?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, you're up.
Yep. Bill, I thank you very much, and the rest of the board, for your time. I'm not going to take the time to read my whole letter to you. It's in the your records, obviously, and calling me up. Long and short of it is, there are two key issues here with regard to what I feel is a lack of disclosure. I certainly heard your attorney explain how someone needs to look at a link, but there's a thing called a common man rule that says, certainly over 30 years of experience in the brokerage business, that there is a inherent requirement for the entity that has understanding of where a link is in this case and where it is, and is to be able to explain to people who are stakeholders, meaning property owners that have enjoyed security behind fences for many, many, many years, that if something's going to change, they need to be notified so that they can have dialogue about it. So in echoing Cynthia's sensitive remarks with regard to this, I would liken it to, if someone's going to change the speed limit out in front of my street, I'm going to be notified at my address that this is going to occur. I would not say that this situation in terms of these fences coming down is any different. That would be something to put out to you as a first issue. The other issue is, because I don't feel that I was adequately informed about this situation, I feel that very definitely my 14th Amendment rights have been violated because there has been a lack of due process with regard to my and people like me, neighbors of mine, to be aware of this situation. So again, I sent the letter to the board. Again, I thank you very much for your time in this situation. I think there should be open dialogue about it before we have a situation where these fences are taken down. I would actually also like to throw out the other question is that has not been answered yet. If this levee maintenance, actually levee improvement, is being done, and this is a temporary situation and the fence has to come down, should not this fence be put back up because it was there before the work was done? So those are three issues I'd like the board to mull on, and I appreciate your time.
William, what's the third one? The fences be put up before construction's done?
Right. Again, I'm echoing Gail Nadel's issue with regard to she owns a permit. Renee down the street, 2 doors down from me, owns a permit. These permits, are they being revoked in the process of doing this work, or can they be sustained so that when the work is done, these fences go back up?
Okay, let me ask a question because I remember that was asked before at our last workshop. Jeet, what's your opinion of that?
Thank you, President Egger. Yes, so as it stands today, people have existing, and I'm assuming valid permits. That may or may not be the case depending on the circumstances. The opinion and intention of board staff is to request that the board revoke the permits that are going to be affected by the construction, and that once construction is complete, those property owners who wish to reconstruct their fences or other encroachments that have been impacted by construction apply for a permit, and they will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis by the board.
Yeah, that's right. And the reason for that is we're trying to get commonality among all of these permits. We have some that do not have time limits on them. We have some that have different wording on them and so on. So the idea was to, among other things, bring these regulations up to date, but also to get some commonality among these permits because we don't have them. Is that one of the reasons, G?
It is, President Egger. Thank you. And again, I would just like to re-emphasize that it is our position that the proposed regulation on fences as it stands now does not affect the ability of property owners to apply for a permit just as they have in the past. So in our view, these proposed regs do not change anything in that regard. Again, it is up to the board's discretion whether or not to approve any permit application, but there's nothing that prohibits that in this instance.
Okay, I hope that answers, or at least that one part of it answers Mr. McClendon's question. Ryan,
what would be the problem in not revoking these permits for the fences? We align all these permits to be uniform and allow these people to continue to own these permits. I don't think there's anybody in this group that has a problem with making these permits uniform.
So,
or specifically the permits on the fences.
Right. So anytime there's a reconstruction of an encroachment, there's a requirement that a permit application be submitted. That can be found in section 6A under our current regulations.
So if we were to do what he said, try to align all of these permits, it would require revoking the old permits anyway?
Yes, for the negative.
Okay. Let's move on. Ryan Vogel, please.
Yes, thank you, President Edgar and members of the board. First, I want to hit on the the public comment period for the proposed rule change. One, we're in the time of COVID right now. We've attended meetings virtually with the board. It's not as easy to be at the meetings, to see the postings on your boards. A lot of us once we see our agenda items such as the November board meeting when we were on talking about the cross levee fence master plan, most of us jumped off after that because we'd said our public comment. We weren't aware of the the changes to Title 23. And while I commend the board and the staff for making these changes to Title 23, these, as Ms. Gallagher stated, this is a massive and multi-year effort to get you to this point. For such a massive undertaking, I just don't understand why you wouldn't just hold a public hearing on the matter. It seems like for something that's been, I guess, 26 years in the making, a public hearing on that would be important. On to the language of 126. Well, thank you, Mr. Dua, for clarifying that it's an either or. The way 126 is written is pretty muddy, and it feels like in the future someone else reading that same language could see it as cross-levee fences are only okay if they're used to protect property that is both needs to be protected and is public property. Because it's an and, not an or, there is some murkiness in there. And while I thank you for your clarification, it would be nice to make that much more explicit. And then on to the also, Mr. Manning had a question about whether these changes to Section 126 would change your consideration, the board's consideration, once an application is made. And I didn't hear kind of a clear, concise answer on that. So I was wondering if you could answer that question. And then I guess my last comment is, in the bike trail section of Title 23, board indemnifies itself against any bike trail encroachment. It'd be nice if we could get some language in there that indemnified and held harmless the property owners that the bike trails can be going through, because that's important for us too. I mean, if it's important enough for the board to indemnify themselves, it's doubly important for us because that's our property. And I'll hear the answers. Thank you.
Ryan, isn't that a question for the city? Since they are the ones that are doing the bike trail.
Sure, but I guess you're asking the permittee to indemnify yourselves. You could also make it a condition of the permit for the permittee to indemnify the landowners upon which property their bike trail is running through.
I can speak to that, Mr. Vogel. All of our current permits, have indemnity language that indemnifies the board and or the state or any other public agency that has maintenance responsibilities for an encroachment. And so to the extent a permit application was approved for a fence or any other encroachment, that language would be there. I don't think it's necessary that it be included in the regs specifically for a bike trail to indemnify private property owners. Those instances are rare, but they could be addressed in a permit as a permit condition. So that's something that we would deal with at that time. I would defer to board staff in terms of their recommendations, but I don't think it's that the fact that it's not specifically called out in the regulations that somehow it's prohibited from being a condition in a permit.
Okay, thank you. And then to Brian Manning's question on whether 126 changes the consideration for permit, do you have any answer on that?
As I said, these will be determined by the board on a case-by-case basis. Board staff will make their recommendation and the board will act on that. It would be premature to say whether the board's going to approve something or not. I will say that for people who are concerned about the and versus the or language, you have it on record what the board's position is. We will meet with our consultant team and we will take your comments under submission and discuss and see if we think it's appropriate to amend our regs to make it more clear or amend our statement of reasons if necessary.
All right, thank you.
There's one person that it's listed to speak that's listed as Mark. We have anybody like that? Mark?
Yes, that's me. Thank you. I submitted an email, but maybe I sent it too late yesterday to be on the speakers list. So thank you for, for taking the time.
I'm still going from the speakers list.
Oh, okay.
You're on the speaker.
Great. Good. So yeah, I'll be fast because I think that everyone has kind of covered this, but Chair Edgar, members of the board, thank you very much for taking the time to hear my comments. My name is Mark Portuondo. I'm a resident here in the Pocket region of Sacramento. My property, like some of the folks on these calls, it abuts the Sacramento River and the eastern levee that's affected by certain rule changes here. And I don't want to echo folks already because I think that language, as someone had said, kind of caused some heartburn with people thinking that was just going to remove cross levee fences altogether, except for on public, agency property. And so I think that's kind of why we had some comments here today, and folks' written comments are kind of speaking to that because there was that fear. And so I'm glad that, that board staff and Mr. Dua kind of clarified that. I do have a question though on that. So in discussing the decision to remove the language from that 2015 workshop, or I don't think you said it was a public draft yet, but in discussing,
I was mistaken. I was mistaken on that. It was a draft that had it in it, and before the draft went public, it was removed. So the public, I don't think, although we knew about it, the public wasn't aware of that, and Jeet made that clear.
Right.
So that's but it was considered at one time, so that's probably where the rumor mill started.
Well, so my question also though is what made that decision to, what made the decision to remove them all, and then also kind of the thinking that went into that, and then B, what is considered too onerous? I don't know if that was Ron or Jeet that made that comment about kind of saying, we thought that maybe removing all of them were too onerous. So is there some type of standard that says, okay, this amount is fine? Does there language exist that, what is that, just kind of an arbitrary decision to say, well, we can't have no cross levee fences, we should at least allow the opportunity to apply for some? I just want to try to get a better understanding of that. And
sorry, I didn't know if you finished, Mark.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Unfortunately, that prior effort predates my time with the board, so I don't have any actual intrinsic knowledge why that was proposed at the time. We just know that it was proposed, and unfortunately, I don't actually people who on board staff that were responsible for drafting that language or proposing that language are also not with the board. But it was when we were reviewing the public comments in the previous draft, we felt there certainly that it was having a absolute prohibition on cross levee fences was not warranted. So that's why we tried to find some middle ground to allow that to go forward.
No, thank you for that. There must be some correspondence. Maybe I can just get a FOIA to ask for that, emails or correspondence, whatever it might be. But I do ask that, I appreciate that folks have listed unauthorized access. And I know that there were October hearings and the public comment session has come and gone. Some of us, we, like that has been said before, we did not know that there was a public comment section. And even though there's a tab that says, public comment, and then you look down on it and it's California Code of Regulations, Section 23, Division 1, Section 8, definitions. That's hard for us to kind of know, especially if we were talking with the board about cross levee fences and the permitting kind of process. I would think that we would have been interested parties, especially ones that have permits for fences, and they're working with board staff to be notified of these types of changes. And so I think that it would be helpful, because you do have a lot of people on here talking about both that change, which, okay, the language is changed, so maybe that's fine. But this other question about holding harmless and indemnifying the state on, proposed bike trails, I just want folks to kind of appreciate some people's perspective of that. Like, there's multiple agencies involved, and we are hearing about revocation proceedings. We are hearing about a planned trail. We are hearing about, maybe cross-levee fences might not be permitted in the future, but they have to come down anyways. And then we see kind of, the city doesn't have a liability plan in place yet because their permit isn't even in yet. They don't have anything in place yet. So we can reach out to the city, but they're not going to care at the moment about any type of liability for themselves or for us, because once those fences come down, and this was the fear of folks that had called in, is that once those fences come down for the work, there's a genuine fear that you're going to have, plenty of people and criminal activity or fires on docks or fires on property or whatever. And then that schools, the businesses, and the residents that live along the levee are going to be held liable. And so, I would ask that if we could hold a targeted hearing on some of these concerns that we're raising, that looks at the impacts of this proposed rule change, especially the safety impacts and the liability concerns that have been raised here. I do also want to raise, and I don't remember who on the engineering side had raised it, but this idea about drones. Another concern that we have had, especially where I am, because I am right up against the levee. I'm not kind of down by Garsha Bend where it's much more kind of flat, and there's at least some space between kind of the property and the levee. For maintenance, a see-through fence, to be able to look for boils and things like that. But that idea of a drone, so we could at least have some type of privacy. There's plenty of people that live here with young kids, or just people that are also very concerned about their privacy. And, I feel a drone and an operator is much cheaper than having maintenance crews driving rigs throughout the night, trying to come down and look at, look into backyards. I don't know if that would be in these types of regulations to include that kind of modernization, but it would be nice. And also, the public comment period obviously is over. I do know that, the governor has extended the timelines for OAL rulemaking on the rulemaking side. I don't know why we can't extend the public comment period on this side of it. I hope that maybe the board can kind of show that same courtesy, and maybe we can have a targeted hearing on some of these questions that people asked about. There are plenty of interested parties that are not construction companies that are impacted by this. And, and I think that a targeted hearing would be a great way to kind of alleviate some of our concerns.
President Egger, if I could just respond briefly. So on your point, I would just like to remind everyone, this update is an overarching update for all of the standards. And quite frankly, we did not deem the change to the fence regulation as significant. And in fact, it wasn't even part of the package to be discussed today as a significant change. It was added at the last minute in response to the comments that we received. So it was there to hopefully allay some concerns of the public that are here today about the fences. To your point about notice, again, we did not deem this as a significant change. Swimming pools, a new section, is a much more significant change for the board. And to assume or somehow assert that we have to go and notify everyone that has a pool within 400 feet or is planning to have a pool within 400 feet of a levee is just, it's just not only uncalled for, it's not enforceable. So I don't know whether to say than that. I can appreciate your concerns. All I can say is what we have said today is that we do not deem the rule change as as it relates to fences to be significant in an impactful way that prevents the property owners in the pocket or big pocket or little pocket area from coming to the board and reapplying for a permit after the construction. And then to the note about the fences coming down, I could let board staff speak to this because it's not my section, but it is my understanding that when those fences are coming down for construction fences will be going up immediately to protect the construction site, which I would assume will probably actually provide more protection than what you have now. But I don't want to assume anything. I would defer to our staff that's overseeing that project to speak to that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jeet. Okay, I'm at the end of my list. Do we see anybody else, Ryan or Leslie?
I have a comment. This is.
Who is this?
This is Gerald Mills.
Okay.
So I share much of the same sentiments that many of my other colleagues. I also live along the river. The first question I have is what is the purpose of this board? It's for the safety of the levee for all of us, I believe. Is that a fair synopsis?
The purpose of this board is to protect the lives and property from in the California Central Valley from catastrophic flooding.
That purpose be better served with homeless people digging holes in the levee wherever they want, or would it be better served with fences segregating only certain areas that could be better enforced? That's my first comment and question. Obviously, no answers required. My second is as far as the hearing and the request for comments, I submitted a comment clearly via the wrong process to Ryan Jones on November 20th, 5 days before those items were posted that we've been talking about and in depth on this call, and I never got a response. And for me not even to hear back, or I asked to be pointed to the right person, to some sort of direction, some sort of, this is what you need to do. If you have concerns, there's it's opening in 5 days. Literally 5 days before, I sent an email to Ryan Jones and I never heard back. I find that a little disconcerting when in item 4A it says there was massive outreach. I'm happy to read my comments, or I'd love to understand. We missed doing exactly writing in, and we didn't get our comments in for a hearing. So I'm a little concerned with the lack of response that we did receive. Is there any comment on that?
No, I have no response to that, but I would ask you to read your comments if you have any.
Sure. I will just read the email that I sent. So I said, hi, Ryan. I was hoping to share with you a few experiences my family and I have had over the years with regards to the beautiful rivers we have in Sacramento. About 4 years ago, my wife, 4 kids, and I volunteered to assist the city in the cleanup of the riverbank along the American River. We wanted to contribute to the beautification of this great area in which we live. I will admit we're a little naive, and 3 hours into the cleanup certainly gave us a dose of stark reality. By that point, we had been exposed to used needles, condoms, human feces, among other garbage left by all the people that had made that area their dwelling. About 2 years ago, I led a group of Boy Scouts and other leaders to clean up along the bank of the Sacramento River behind Zacharias Park. It's 763 Clipper Way, Sacramento. We had about 8 people and filled up around 5 large garbage bags in about 45 minutes. We probably only covered 300 yards. As a part of this exercise, we drove back to where I live on Benham Way and entered the fenced area, which is 3/4 of a mile, and we weren't able to find enough garbage to even fill a backpack. Just a few months ago, my wife and one of my children rode our bikes to Zacharias Park and rode up the bike trail following the Sacramento River north until we came to the fences. We enjoy riding our bikes, and I would like to say that we had a wonderful ride. Unfortunately, that was not the case. It was eerily similar to what we experienced along the American River a couple of years ago. The smell of human urine was palpable. Garbage was strewn all over. If that were the worst part, that may not be so concerning, but there were parts of the public trail where we were concerned for our physical safety, as so many people were walking over the bike path towards the river carrying their knives, and there was some sort of community going on down there. Other such items heading to the underbrush by the river. I closed saying that what my name was, and I currently live on Benham Way and have significant concerns with the staff recommendation to the CVFPB denying the cross-levy fence permits. This will directly impact my family's safety, our property rights, degrade our way of life, and urge this board to reconsider this recommendation. Right now, the fences have done a great job of keeping the riverbank by our home clean, safe, beautiful, natural, and we would like to help keep it that way. Can you please direct me to the appropriate member of the board staff so that I may address my concerns with them? Thank you so much for your help. 5 days later, you posted something. It was posted for the Title 23, of which we missed our opportunity. Had somebody pointed me in that direction, it was literally happening that same week. It just doesn't match up with the extensive public outreach that was quoted in board item 4A.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else want to respond to this point?
Yes, please, President Egger.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Donald Murphy. I'm a 20-year resident of the Pocket area. I live on Pocket Road. I own 2 parcels on the levee. And I want to thank you and the board and the staff members for giving us this opportunity to be heard. First point I want to make is I certainly appreciate Mr. Dua's comments that the easement rights that have been granted to the flood board from myself and other property owners here does not include public access. And I'm wondering, is there a way for the flood board to help us inform the public of this? Because there are a number of misconceptions here up and down the levee about what is private property and what isn't. And it was stated earlier, I think by Mr. Lightstone, that articles have been written which are causing residents here to believe that, oh yeah, the fences are coming down, this whole river is public access, and you even agreed that it is not. Is there any way that the board can help us eliminate this misconception?
I'm not sure it's a legal use of public funds, but that would be an issue that the staff would have to advise the board about.
Okay, well, to further that, I mean, isn't there a way, since you're the ones that authorize and permit any encroachment, that there could be some type of signage that differentiates private versus public parcels along the levee?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, well, not that that would be a great deterrent, because people blow through the fences as they are right now. They rip down my neighbor's fence all the time to get through it. But something that acknowledges the fact that there is private property here, and it really is private property, unlike what a number of the newspaper articles have stated. So I'll leave that as something for you to maybe consider. I'd like to move into a few items about the permitting process. First of all, I think Mr. Lemon has probably been involved in the permitting department as a chief, or even before he was chief of the department. I'm just curious, in the past 10 years, how many cross-levy fence permit requests have been made and accepted, if any?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure the staff has that information readily available.
Okay, well then,
Jeet, do you know whether we have that information?
It would take a search of our database, but I don't think anybody has that at our fingertips at this point.
okay, well, I will tell you that I attempted to obtain that information. I was not able to do so, at least not easily, but I can refer you to permit application number 18413, which I personally submitted back in 2010, and it was during 2011 at the board meeting downtown that my application was rejected. And the primary reason for that was the denial recommendations by the Corps of Engineers and Maintenance Area 9 that the flood board would not accept my permit on the basis that it would impede your ability to maintain the levee. In fact, Mr. Edgar, in the November meeting this past year, you commented, you echoed the fact that fences would impede levee work. So this causes me to wonder that, I think it's the comment that is repeatedly made, oh, all of the existing fence owners have to do after their fence comes down is apply for a new fence permit. But realistically, the Corps of Engineers and the maintenance area people are going to do the same denial requests as they've done in the past, and the flood board said you did not want to go against their wishes. In one of the meetings last year, Mr. Countryman on the board made an interesting comment that maybe there could be consideration to fences being erected at various access points to the levee. So I thought that might be an interesting twist to this problem, but I hope you folks are still considering that. One other item on the fences is that, will existing fence owners be given any kind of priority if they have to apply for new fence permits? And there are other people that require or request fence permits.
Normally our process is to work on permits on a first come, first served basis.
Okay,
That's what we normally do. Now, given this situation, I would think that the people who have existing permits, which we want to bring up to date and harmonize with the other permits, since they're all different and have different content and so on, I think you'd probably be the first on the list anyway, because you wouldn't, but anyway.
Okay, I think that's a point that was never mentioned before, because I mean, anyone can request a fence permit, I guess, put the $3,000 up and fill out the paperwork. So I have one last item I'd like to ask, and I'm just curious, would any and all government agencies, and for example, the city of Sacramento, be subject to the same exact permit application standards and subsequent approval and or denial process for an encroachment on the levee, as would a private property owner?
Well, they'd have to meet the same criteria.
All right, the exact same criteria?
Well, unless, you remember Mr. Dua talked about a fence protecting a public facility like a sewage treatment plant and so on.
Yeah, but I'm only discussing the private property aspects
Yeah,
of this.
okay, all right.
Okay, so.
Well, it may be privately owned by the utility, is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, let's face it, most of us in the pocket area that live on the levee are concerned about the pending bike trail. And so the question really relates to if the city wanted to proceed with that, they would have to get it permitted. And if they have to come under the same stipulations that the private property owners have to, and the Corps of Engineers and MAA 9 have already rejected permits based on impediment to levee support and maintenance, I got to believe a bike trail would compound that issue many times over. That's my last comment. Thank you very much for your time and allowing me the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate it. Anybody else at this point? Any comments from the public? We see any?
President Aguirre, this is Ryan Larson from the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Just wanted to go through a couple notes. My name is Ryan Larson, Chief of the Levees and Channels Branch of the Army Corps of Engineers. I just want to go through a couple points here from today's conversation. You know, our charge back when we started this effort long ago was to try to make things consistent where possible, as the slide said, but consistent where possible, and then where they couldn't be consistent, at least make them compatible with one another. You know, things like, you know, as much as, at least this, or, you know, no greater than, you know, trying to create some wiggle so we can have compatibility between our two organizations. You know, and there might be cases where one might be more stringent than another, you know, for one reason or another. But again, that was our charge, and that's where I think we ended up. And so I do want to let's say that it has been a long effort. You know, myself as one of the Levee Safety Program Managers, and then the other ones, Mary Perlia, Levee Safety Program Manager, Mike Kynett, and now currently Eric James have all contributed in some way, shape, or form to this effort. So definitely, you know, thanks to those folks. I do want to cover a couple of specific things in this presentation. There was a note about Section 133 and RD 1000. I just wanted to say that what we're doing there, and part of that conversation, is just making RD 1000 just like everything else, everywhere else, as far as any activity on the water side of the levee needs a hydraulic analysis or needs hydraulic justification for its project. There's some language in there in the current version of Title 23 that says, hey, anything between 65 and 150 feet away from the center line of the Garden Highway, it can just be, or it doesn't need a hydraulic analysis, excuse me. And so we heard the conversation about we couldn't find the evidence of that hydraulic analysis or the supporting documentation that supported that 65 to 150 feet. And so we're just saying there is just, hey, it's just like everywhere else in the system where there's anything else on the water side, we need the hydraulic justification to support it. A note to Board Member Countryman about the risk and uncertainty analysis piece. And I just want to say that, you know, from the board as a sponsor to many core projects, you know, where we should be able to find the information about where a levee is an RNU levee as opposed to a deterministic freeboard levee, that should be in the operations and maintenance manual. You know, my staff, we're going to do our darndest to make sure that is clear and that it's in there. It's not going to be well, just turn it into the core and we'll see if it's an RNU levee or not. I think that was part of our conversation, you know, as we were putting these things together. But help help our staff remember that too. Is that we need to make sure that, you know, because all of the OM manuals today currently say, you know, this levee was designed to provide at least 3 feet of freeboard, you know, above the design floodplain. You know, so as we're updating projects and moving into that newer criteria about risk and uncertainty, the manual should change, or at least show the reaches where RNU was used. So I don't want that to be a mystery. It needs to be in the O&M manuals, and as our partner here, we'll make sure that we document that appropriately. To Board Member Griego, the concern about the pipelines, I think absolutely this lines up with the conversations we've been having recently about pipelines and to support the board's effort in making sure that pipes through the levee are in good condition. The language about the inspections. So, this is what we expect. This will certainly help the board ensure that pipes to the levee are in good condition. There was a note in the chat about recreation features. So the Corps of Engineers administers the rehabilitation program. So strict recreation features are not eligible for rehabilitation assistance. So I'll just quote 500-1 ER 500-1-1. It says in here that structures built for channel alignment, navigation, recreation, a couple other purposes are not flood control works and are not permitted for rehabilitation assistance. I believe your comment said it was a recreation feature on top of a levee. That levee would be a flood control work that would be eligible for rehabilitation assistance. If it was a dual purpose type situation where there was recreation and flood risk management or flood control, that recreation feature wouldn't be eligible for the PL 8499 rehabilitation assistance, but the levee itself would be. I just wanted to clear that up from the comments there. So I believe that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, anybody else? We see any, Ryan or Jones?
I see no hands raised from the public at this moment.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Leslie?
I don't see anything here, Mr. President.
Okay,
I make a motion that we have a hearing on the new regulations for which nobody that was affected was effectively notified.
Mr. President, that's not one of your board members.
Okay, I'm going to bring back this this meeting back to the board unless we have another public comment. Any public comments? Okay. At this point, we're going to bring this matter back to the board members. There's going to be no action. This is a workshop. There's no action today. As Jeet indicated, the final action on this matter will be brought to the board at either the February or March regular board meeting. I hope that's clear to everybody. These are the regulations which include the fences. Okay, any questions from the board?
Mr. President, Brian Johnson here. Thank you. So we don't respond to comments as they go. It would be chaotic, and so we can't all take those each time. But I want to jump in here on the full breadth of the comments today with a couple of reactions. First of all, I do take this very seriously, and I want to thank you all for coming and for bringing us your concerns. You've raised a number of issues that I think are legitimate and do not all have obvious answers for us, and that's very helpful to us. And so thank you for doing that. I also take very seriously the comments that go toward process and having people be informed of things that we're preparing to do and be able to comment. Believe me, I've been in your shoes, working with agencies, and I know how hard it can be when you don't do this for a living and you may not be able to keep up with every single agenda and every line item, and that's challenging. And I also know, from our staff or other agencies' point of view, sometimes it feels like people are doing everything they can to have everybody in the world know what's going on, and still people don't find out about it, and until maybe the last minute. And so I would just urge us all to not be defensive about that, and instead to really challenge us, and not think, because we are trying to do things the right way, that means that we couldn't do a better job of it. And so, to fellow board members and staff, to really challenge us to think about how we can be getting out there with our information, so that people have a chance to participate for us. And the last thing I'll say, there were comments about how this is all decided, and I can speak for myself. I can assure you that I have not made up my mind about any future permits, including any that might come from people here or anywhere else. Thank you.
Yes, for the information of the board itself, I've written some notes, and it seems to me that there are 3 issues here which we'll get a report from the staff about. One is notification and targeted hearings regarding the cross levy fences and so on. And the second issue has to do with language in section 126 regarding the and or, which I believe Jeet has clarified, but that still seems to be an open question. And then the third area is the hold harmless issue, which has been raised. And those are the 3 areas that I see are have been talked about today. Okay, anything else from the board?
Well, I have one other comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Brian, for sharing that. And I wanted to just add one thing to our list. This also came up during the discussion, Bill. I understand that the change sets some of the dominoes in motion, and to the extent that other public agencies are affected by that. I know we talked about the school district as one example, the city as another. I think we do have a responsibility to communicate with those folks and to make sure that we are lined up and understand who's doing what, who needs to be responsible for what. So I would defer to Leslie and Jeet, but I think anything we need to do to connect those dots, I would support us doing those things. And if the board can help, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Okay, that would be a 4th issue, I think, other public agency interface. Okay, anything else? Other board members? Okay, let's move on to item 5. Hearing no further comment on that item. Hearing on item 5 is public comment. Are there any public comments other than what we've just heard on this issue from the public? Do we see any, Ryan or Leslie?
I have a message from Darlene Jeffrey and Ron Kehoe, and it says, I'm getting some echo. Where's that? Okay, that should help. So Darlene Jeffrey and Ron Kehoe say, I'm technically challenged and cannot enter the area to talk. My question as a levy owner is, will we be notified as to the exact date of the next regular meeting of the board when they will be addressing the cross levy fence permits?
The answer is yes.
So, Mr. President, we don't provide individual notice as part of our regular notice proceedings, but all of our agendas are posted 10 days in advance in accordance with California law, and all of the items that are going to be heard are on the agendas. So looking at the website will give you that information. We also do have a listserv. If you would like to be added to the listserv, you just let Ryan Jones know and he can add you to that. And those folks are actually sent a copy of the agenda. Correct, Ryan?
I think, given the testimony today, Leslie, it might be helpful to amend that policy to make sure that the people who testified at this meeting be notified the next time this is on the agenda, either March
Yeah, we
or.
can certainly do that. We just need them to let us know what their contact information is so that we know who to add to the list.
What's the best way, Leslie, for them to do that? Should Ryan have his email out there? Do they go to our website? Is it easy?
Right. Either one. Ryan's email is on every agenda. It's printed on every agenda, and there's also information on the website.
So anybody listening can just look at any old agenda, send Ryan a note, get on the listserv, and then also we have a pretty consistent every third Friday schedule for board meetings as well.
It's typically the fourth Friday.
The
Sometimes the
Friday,
third.
Mike.
Yeah,
You missed it.
I meant fourth.
Correct.
Not trying to trick everybody out there. Not trying to trick anybody. Yes.
That's the fourth Friday. Okay.
We tell Mike it's the third. It makes it a little bit easier sometimes.
That explains why I go to extra board meetings and no one's at them.
No, we're certainly happy to add anyone who would like extra notice to that listserv. There's a number of people on it already, and it's no trouble to add more. So you just need to let us know you want to be on it.
Yeah, that goes to Brian's point that let's just be as helpful as we can and letting folks know about what we're doing. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.
This is Jeet. I would just like to add, to the extent it involves, a revocation proceeding or enforcement action related to any of these permits, those property owners will be receiving individual notice well in advance. There's a 30-day notice requirement that they be provided prior to any hearing. So they will be getting notice. In terms of our overarching rulemaking, we intend to bring this before the board at this month's board meeting. Barring any unforeseen issues, we did receive a comment letter that we have acknowledged, so we're going to be looking at that and see if that changes anything. There's still a little legwork to do in assembling the final rulemaking package. So I would just remind everyone to look at our agendas, as Leslie indicated, get on the listserv, and if this item does come up in terms of bringing the rulemaking package to the board for approval, that will be clearly stated on that agenda.
And just for clarification, it's February 26th.
Thank you, Joe. That is correct.
Okay.
I think that was for me. Gee, that was for me.
Okay. Moving from item 5, we're on item number 6, which is adjourned, and without objection, this workshop session is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.